All right, we're going to get to some questions now before we wrap this up. Looking for the GIF that invites the asking of questions. There it is. I found an old USFL GIF. I think that's the New Orleans Breakers. The quarterback lines up under the right guard and is told to get over to the center, who is over there. I think that's the old New Orleans Breakers helmet. Or was it the Boston Breakers? I think it was the Boston Breakers at first, and maybe it became the New Orleans Breakers. All right. Jay Boogs. What's the over-under? Mike watched Aaron Rodgers' interview this morning on Pardon My Take. My response was, I don't think you know how over-under works because there's no over-under on whether I watched it. The over-under would be on how much of it I watched. I listened to all of it. I wrote about it at PFT. He addresses for the first time his decision to skip the mandatory minicamp. I'll defer my thoughts on that subject to what I've already written. I will say this, though. And I've said this before on PFT Live. I think Aaron Rodgers and I do have some things in common. Maybe that's kind of why we butt heads, because we're maybe more alike than not alike. Although there are some specific things about Aaron Rodgers where I won't go there. You know, the whole everything's a conspiracy theory and the vaccination stuff and everything's there. But he really likes Seinfeld. And he made a pretty good Seinfeld reference during that Pardon My Take interview. And I thought that's a pretty good one. That's something only an aficionado could rattle off just like that. So I got to give him that. And also the picture we used, he's smoking a good cigar. I mean, I think if Aaron Rodgers and I could have an off-the-record sit down and have some tequila or some bourbon and a cigar, we'd have a pretty good conversation. I think we would, after he beat the shit out of me. While I'm licking my wounds and otherwise recovering from being pummeled by Aaron Rodgers, I think we'd have a pretty good conversation. All right. What's next? PFT PM Posse, best and worst moments, experiences, memories from the beach trip last week. Well, as you might know, we came home early from the beach by 2 days because we had a little COVID situation. My sister-in-law tested positive on Wednesday. She and her daughters cleared out after that because we had my wife's parents with us. They're both in their 80s. We don't want to expose them to COVID because it can have a specific bad outcome for folks in that age group. So they left. The next morning, my wife tested positive. We left. So that was the worst part, having to leave with 2 days left on the rental. Most of the folks stuck around. They had a good time, and that's good. I still haven't tested positive. Now, think about this. My wife and I shared a room, and despite 35 years of her dealing with me, we still share a room and a bed somehow, some way. I don't want to go too far into detail, but she hasn't kicked me out yet into another, wing of the house, except when she has COVID. And I didn't get it from her, sharing a room, and it was a fairly small room and a fairly small bathroom. I didn't get it there. 9 hours on the way home in the car. She didn't wear a mask. I didn't wear a mask. We didn't roll the windows down. I just figured, I'm going to get it. I thought, okay, we need to leave because we don't want her parents to get it. And if I'm going to get it, I'd rather get it at home. I don't want to get it and have to drive home with it and feel like crap driving home, whatever symptoms you may have. When I had it the last time, I had a fever and body aches and all that stuff. I don't want to drive 9 hours feeling like shit. So I fully expected I was going to get it. And watch, as soon as I finish, I'm probably going to start manifesting symptoms. But it's been 4 days now since we were crammed together in the car, and I still haven't gotten it. So we'll see if I end up getting it. That was the worst part, though, having to leave. The best part, though, and it's great having everybody together. We had 20 people in this house, and it had, 12 bedrooms. I mean, it was big enough, but it was a lot of activity. And my niece, from my side of the family, this is the first time we intermingled the families for a vacation, because it's always been my wife's side of the family and the various tributaries there. My niece, my sister's daughter, her boyfriend, and their son came. And he's 2. And that was great because I only ever see him a few hours at a time. They live 3 hours away. You go out, you see him, and you drive home. This was like 5 days nonstop. And it's just great to be around a 2-year-old. He's fascinated by everything. He babbles. He repeats everything that he hears, which required me to self-edit myself as to many of the things I would have said. Although I did say one certain word that begins with cluster that he did not repeat. He must not have been paying attention. But that was great. Being around him, being around them more than just for a few hours at a time I really enjoyed that. So the whole thing was great until we had to come home. But hey, I'm refreshed, I'm rejuvenated, and I'm ready for another football season. Okay, what else do we have here? At PFT PM Posse, when negotiating big deals with franchise quarterbacks, should teams bring them in and say, this is our plan over the next 3 years if you sign for this, and this is our plan if you sign for this amount? Should the Cowboys do this with Dak? Look, every team is going to have its own approach. Sometimes they're very candid about their plans. Sometimes they're not. I don't think any of it matters. What matters is, as Tua Tagovailoa said several weeks ago, the market is the market. You've got a guy like Dak Prescott. There's no way the Cowboys can restrain him from hitting the market after this season. That's the biggest impediment to getting a deal done, because whatever the Cowboys offer, Dak Prescott can say, I can just play this year out and I'll let the market decide my value. And maybe I'll go to a different team like Kirk Cousins did last year with the Vikings. So I think that's the biggest problem. And I think that's why we saw the report over the weekend that the Cowboys are prioritizing CeeDee Lamb's contract over Dak's. You know why? Because Dak's not going to hold out. CeeDee Lamb is. If they want CeeDee Lamb to be there this year, they got to get him paid. At some point, they got to move on from Dak and say, we'll put a pin in this, we'll get to it later, because there's no reason to think he won't show up. Now, watch, now he'll hold out. But I don't think there's any reason to believe he would hold out. He's fine with his contract. He's fine with the circumstances. He's ready to play for what he's due to make this year and hit the market next year. I still think they need to be concerned about Michael Parsons, because even though he said all the right things, at the end of the day, if I was Michael Parsons, I would not show up. Given the position he plays, given what he's going to be making this year, I would not show up until I got my new contract. All right, next up. CJ Newman, what is the best, as you put it, Stanford band play you've ever seen? Well, CJ, the Stanford band play is the best Stanford band play I've ever seen. I hate to take the easy way out, but that's why they call it the Stanford band play. When something better comes along, they'll call plays like that play, and the Stanford band play will be relegated to the dustbin of history. Another one from CJ Newman. Very specific questions here that are also easy to answer. Do you have an NFL Plus account? No. Next question. And there's no reason why. Look, I don't need any of that stuff, because I go to NBC, and on Sundays I see all the games as they happen. And did we have Sunday Ticket last year? Yeah, we had Sunday Ticket last year. Don't have it this year. I may have to get it, or I may have to get NFL Plus, because I like to rewatch games when I get home. So I may have to get NFL Plus. It's either going to be NFL Plus or Sunday Ticket. We'll see. But for me personally, I don't need to watch them all live. I don't need to pay to watch them live. I like to watch the re-airs or the condensed versions after the fact. Let's see. Colin Adams, isn't advocating for a given player to get paid more a zero-sum game, since most of the teams use the entire salary cap each year? If one player gets a big contract, how many other players can't get that money when they otherwise would have? First of all, I take issue with the idea that most teams use the entire salary cap each year. That's just not true. We get to the point where some teams will end up with these massive cap availabilities because they've carried over and they haven't spent to the cap. There's a requirement under the CBA to spend a certain amount of cash on a 4-year rolling average, but you can kick money over endlessly. We don't have a situation where all teams are spending to the cap. And, I like to quote Peyton Manning on this point. It's my job to get paid as much as I can. It's your job to manage the salary cap. And yes, it is a zero-sum game to a certain point, but the best players deserve to get paid the most, period. It is a star-driven sport, and the difference between the best and the average player, that needs to be reflected in what the best makes and the average player makes. And this is where the rookie wage scale kind of sets the baseline. I said this earlier, if there was no salary cap, as long as you have a draft, and as long as you have a rookie wage scale that holds those numbers to a very reasonable amount, that's how you build the guts of your team. And you pick a certain number of those guys who develop into star players to get big contracts. Other guys get medium-sized contracts or just leave in free agency and are replaced by somebody else who comes in at a cheap level. The rookie wage scale is the heart and soul of an NFL roster. That's why I'm always leery about, F them picks, because you're trading in guys that become the building blocks of your team for a veteran player who costs a lot of money and is only going to do so much. Now, for a quarterback, okay, F them picks. Well, just ask the Browns how that's worked out. Because in addition, we focus on the money. In addition to the money, they gave up 3 first-round picks and 3 mid-round picks. 6 players who would have been on the Browns for a reasonable cost. Now, we've been talking about alternate universes as it relates to the NFL's antitrust violation in the Sunday Ticket case. What about the alternate universe where the Browns, as good as they are right now, are even better because they didn't give up 3 first-round draft picks and used them on players? The players they could have had with those picks, the players they could have had with the 3 other picks. How much better would the Browns be? They could be a juggernaut right now. They could be the Texans right now, right? So it's just something to keep in mind when it relates to the value of draft picks. Yes, you have a great player and you want to keep him, you got to pay him. And one of the reasons you can pay him, and one of the reasons why this idea of you're robbing Peter to pay Paul falls apart, you've always got a nucleus of your team. Think about it. All your rookies who make the team, all the guys from last year who were draft picks who made the team, the guys from 2 years ago who were draft picks that made the team. I mean, you're looking at 25 guys thereabouts right there. And then you got guys in the 4th year of their rookie contracts. You could have more than half of your roster made up of guys who are on rookie wage scale controlled contracts. That's why you can afford to pay your stars. Or if you don't, someone else will. Nate, do you play fantasy football? What are your thoughts on the industry? I play. We started playing a family league back in 2006, and we play it every year. And I think I was back-to-back champion a couple of years ago. It took me a long time to win one, and then I won 2. We have a barn league as well that's been around for about 7 or 8 years. And I just do it. It's fun. It's a pain in the butt to get it all set up and get it rolling. There's no money involved. It's just bragging rights, and it just makes the games a little more interesting. When your favorite team sucks, you can at least enjoy the fantasy side of it. The one concern I have with it, and this relates to fantasy and it relates to prop bets, gambling generally, the players already are dehumanized to a certain extent. When you throw fantasy football and specifically prop bet gambling on top of it, it dehumanizes them even more. As I've said before, they become the dice on the craps table. They become the steel ball on the roulette wheel. They become the cards at a blackjack game. They're not human anymore. And what have we seen? There was an item in USA Today several weeks back about how many baseball players are in fear for their safety and the safety of their families because they get harassed, harangued, and threatened by gamblers who view those guys. It's like actually being able to yell at the dice. When you need a 6 and it comes up 7, you can yell at the dice because the dice are human beings. And so they become, and I guess this is an ironic turn, even less human because the other humans will yell at them and accuse them and scream at them. And that's the thing I don't like about it. I don't like the fact that we take these guys that we're already inclined to view as kind of robots, cyborgs, they're in their gear, and we don't think of them as brothers, husbands, spouses, friends, cousins, nephews, etc., fathers. We think of them as what they can do for us. And it used to be what they can do for our favorite team. Now it's what they can do for our fantasy team because we own them, and also what they can do for our short-term financial interest because we bet on them either getting to or not getting to whatever arbitrary number. And it's not arbitrary. It's based upon what the sports books think, will even out the betting, but we view them as something other than the human beings that they are. That's the problem I have with it. And it's not like anybody is listening to me, but I'm allowed to say it. I'm allowed to articulate it, even if a lot of you just, want to watch your football and not think about the fact that the players are becoming more and more and more just game pieces instead of human beings. All right, what else do we have here? This is a good question from our good friend Pauline, and I know I'm not pronouncing it the right way because she's in the UK. Is there any team not previously thought to be dysfunctional that is at risk of being dysfunctional this season? You got to start with the Cowboys. Now, it's hard to say they're dysfunctional because more often than not they contend. You could say they're dysfunctional because they haven't been to an NFC Championship game since 1995. But it sure feels like they're going to be a dysfunctional mess this year because of how they've mismanaged these key contracts. But other than that, as I said earlier, good teams stay good and bad teams stay bad. And as my friend Big Cat said years ago, and I use it all the time, and I try to credit him every time I do because it's too good to just act like I came up with it. Dysfunctional teams do dysfunctional things. And if you're not dysfunctional, and this goes all the way up to ownership. Ownership, I think, really, really sets the tone. It's hard to become dysfunctional. And we don't see it very often that a non-dysfunctional team becomes dysfunctional. Now, that said, let's stay in the NFC East. I wouldn't call the Eagles dysfunctional, but I'll tell you what, there was something dysfunctional happening late in the 2023 season. And if that hasn't been eradicated, whatever that was, could they become dysfunctional this year? Possibly. They're confident they fixed whatever it was that caused them to implode last year, but that's a team to keep an eye on. I can't really think of anything. I think in the AFC, the Patriots weren't dysfunctional with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. Now that they're both gone, and now that we've had a changeover in front office and coaching staff, at least head coach, I know there's some commonality back to Bill Belichick, both there and in the front office, but you got Elliott Wolf as the head of the front office. You've got Gerard Mayo as the head coach. Could they turn dysfunctional? Could these decisions that they've made in recent years, and you look at where the roster is, could the Patriots be headed for kind of like this constant churn of 4-13, 5-12, not really contending? That's possible. So I'm trying to think of others. I'll go with those three. Cowboys, Eagles, and Patriots are the potential ones. But for the most part, dysfunctional teams stay dysfunctional, and non-dysfunctional teams stay non-dysfunctional. And I'm getting dysfunctional today because I've gone over an hour. We're going to call it. If I didn't get to your question today, ask it again tomorrow. We are committed to no days off. Forget about the past 5 weeks. Focus on the next 3. We're committed to no days off for the next 3 weeks until PFT Live returns on Monday, August 12th. Thanks as always. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.